Welcome to a podcast by OpenTheWord.org, where we discuss a bit of Bible, a bit of life, and a bit of politics.
Hi, my name is Dean Smith, and in this podcast, I want to ask the question, is there a demonic root to communism? Some may consider that an odd topic since, most communist regimes are, officially atheistic. But communism is very much in vogue these days with an odd twist. We have left-wing anarchists calling for communism in America, while at the same time, thousands of Cubans are marching in the streets calling for an end to communism in that island nation. Ironically, those who have never experienced communism want it, and those who have actually lived under it are desperate to get rid of it. But with Cubans taking to the streets, I thought it appropriate to discuss an interesting article in the New York Post written by Juan Sanchez back in 2015. The article was entitled, "Inside Fidel Castro's Luxurious Life on His Secret Island Getaway." You have probably never heard of Juan, but for 17 years he worked as personal security for Fidel Castro, otherwise known as El Comandante, the glorious leader of Cuba's glorious communist revolution. In 1994, Juan had had enough and retired, and as thanks for his years of dedicated service, Castro promptly threw Juan in prison for several years. After his release, Juan fled to the United States. Once in America, Juan wrote a book entitled The Double Life of Fidel Castro. It was the hypocrisy he witnessed firsthand that finally sickened Juan of Fidel Castro and his glorious communist revolution. During his presidential reign, Castro was famous for his, 5-hour speeches and even currently holds the world record for the longest-winded speech at the UN, 4 hours and 29 minutes. During his speeches, Castro typically wore his army fatigues and boasted that he was a man of the people and only earned the equivalent of a, paltry $38 US a month, and repeatedly claimed that he only owned a small fishing hut on the ocean. But the reality was much more incredible than that. Castro showed the world what you could do with a measly $38 a month if you simply embraced Marxism. Because Juan alleges while earning only $38 a month, Fidel managed to own, 20 properties across Cuba, including a luxury home that he built on a small island just off the coast of Cuba called Cayo Piedra, or Little Jewel. Incredibly, with his $38 monthly stipend, Castro was able to staff his homes. He also owned a large yacht. Now, to be fair, it was donated by Soviet Union President Leonid Brezhnev, but still, Fidel was able to pay for his crew, gas, food, and nightly parties from his $38 monthly salary. It showed how a person could stretch their finances under communism if you just embrace this ideology and put your mind to it. And he even had a fully stocked hospital. When I say stocked, I mean fully stocked. According to Juan, it included 2 people with the same blood type as Fidel. Look, I can understand how left-wing anarchists are clamoring for communism in America. If you could get all this for $38 US a month, what could you expect under Marxism while earning America's median salary of $3,900 a month? Yet for some bizarre reason, tens of thousands of Cubans took to the streets, marching and protesting against Cuba's glorious communist revolution. Of course, communism was originally the brainchild of a German man, Karl Marx, who died in 1883. He wrote the Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital, 2 major books that provided the basic economic theory behind communism, explaining how you could afford everything Castro had on just $38 US a month. Who wouldn't want this? Marx also called for the end of capitalism and the development of a classless society as workers rose up and destroyed the ruling bourgeoisie. Of course, he was simply replacing the current bourgeoisie with a communist one. And we need to understand a classless society as Fidel understood it. Several years back, I remember watching an interview of a young man sitting at a Marxist-Leninist propaganda table at a university. When the interviewer asked him to explain all the communist failures over the past several decades, the man retorted that he would do communism differently. And today's communists are trying to spin these past failures by claiming they weren't true communism because, they never developed a classless society. Many tried, but, man's old sinful nature got in the way time and again. What is that modern definition of insanity that we so often toss around? Doing the same thing again and again, but expecting a different result. I hate to disappoint you, but not everyone gets their own personal hospital that includes 2 people with their blood type under communism. But as communism took root around the world, we have seen nothing but oppression, poverty, denial of basic human rights, and tens of millions of deaths. And this ideology falls in line with what Jesus said in John 10:10, that the thief, that it was an allusion to Satan, comes to steal, kill, and destroy, which is essentially communism's motto. But is there a spiritual dimension to communism? Though Marx ultimately became famous as the founder of communism, he also had a dark side. One darker than communism. Karl Marx was a poet, and before he founded communism, he was also a Christian and even wrote Christian literature. So he understood Christianity and the Bible. He understood God and Satan. He understood good and evil. And as we look at his poetry, we see references to the satanic realm as he braced this new strange ideology that dominated much of the world this past century. In his poem entitled The Player, Karl Marx wrote these ominous words: "The hellish vapors rise and fill the brain till I go mad, and my heart is utterly changed. See the sword, the prince of darkness sold it to me, and with Satan I have struck my deal." Though Marxist supporters have tried to brush it off as just poetry, Marx knew exactly what he was saying, and almost prophetically, the sword, accomplished by blood and violence, followed communism wherever it gained a foothold. The Black Book of Communism, published in 1997 and written by several European academics, details the mass murders and genocides committed by communist regimes around the world. They concluded that up to that point, communism was directly responsible for at least 100 million deaths, including 65 million in communist China under Mao Zedong, 20 million in the Soviet Union under Josef Stalin, 2 million in Cambodia under Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge. But Marx's poetry had other satanic allusions. In his poem, Invocation of One in Despair, Marx writes about building his throne high overhead, writing, "So a God has snatched me from my all in the curse and rack of destiny. All his words are gone beyond recall. Nothing but revenge is left in me. I shall build my throne high overhead. Cold, tremendous shall its summit be, for its bulwark, superstitious dread, for its marshal, blackened agony." And when we combine these words with another poem where Marx declares himself equal with God, writing, "Then I shall walk triumphantly like a god through the reigns of their kingdom. Every word of mine is fire and action. My breath is equal to that of the Creator." When we read those words, those two combined together, you see an eerie resemblance to the words of the prophet Isaiah as he described the fall of Satan, writing, "But you, Satan, said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God, and I will sit on the mount of the assembly in the recesses of the north. Isaiah 14, verses 13 to 14. And in his book, The Devil and Karl Marx, college professor Dr. Paul Kinger noted that Karl Marx was often heard chanting one of his favorite sayings, "Everything that exists deserves to perish." It was a chant he uttered over and over again. It was actually a direct quote from the demonic being Mephistopheles in Johann Goeth's book Faust, where Johann Faust sells his soul to the devil in exchange for wisdom and worldly pleasures. But there may be another interesting connection between communism and the demonic found in the book of Revelation, the Apostle John's vision of the end times. In Revelation chapter 2, John had an unusual word for the church at Pergamon, writing, "And to the angel of the church of Pergamum write, I know where you dwell, where Satan's throne is, and you hold fast my name and did not deny my faith, even in the days of Antipas, my witness, my faithful one, who was killed among you where Satan dwells." Revelation chapter 2, verses 12 to 13. The same Greek word for dwell, katokio, is used to describe both the believers and Satan dwelling in Pergamum. According to the Expository Dictionary of the New Testament, the word means to settle down in a dwelling, to dwell fixedly in a place. In other words, at this point in history, Satan was literally dwelling in the city of Pergamum, located today in modern Turkey. But Pergamum was more than just a dwelling place for Satan. The passage adds that Satan also had his throne there, meaning it was also the seat of authority for the satanic kingdom. And there was an actual physical representation of this authority at Pergamum, because it was also the home of the throne of Zeus, a massive altar built around 200 BC. It was 35 meters wide and 33 meters deep. The altar existed when the Apostle John wrote Revelation, and this was the throne of Satan that John was referring to. But as Christianity became dominant in Rome, the Pergamon altar fell out of use and gradually disappeared, covered by debris and dirt. Forgotten for nearly 2,000 years, the altar was rediscovered by German archaeologists in 1878, who then transferred it to a museum on Berlin's Museum Island in 1901. Was this move, resurrecting the throne of Satan, significant? Well, 13 years later, after its arrival, World War I started, which was largely instigated by the Germans and the Austrians, that resulted in the deaths of 16 million people. Then in 1939, Germany under Adolf Hitler started World War II, where over 60 million were killed, including 6 million Jews in concentration camps. Was there a demonic influence behind World War I and later Adolf Hitler, or was the throne's arrival in Berlin just a coincidence? Neil Kressel, in his book Mass Hate, The Global Rite of Genocide and Terror, said this about Hitler. Overwhelmingly, Germans speak with mystification of Hitler's hypnotic appeal. The word shows up again and again. Hitler is said to have mesmerized the nation, captured them in a trance from which they could not break loose. But then a strange thing happens. The Pergamon altar is moved. After the defeat of Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union, which captured Berlin, took the altar as spoils of war, transferring it to the Hermitage Museum in Leningrad in 1945. For most of the time it was there, the country was ruled by Josef Stalin, who died in 1953, and he was arguably one of the greatest mass murderers of the world has ever seen, only second to Mao. Now, to be fair, Stalin was involved in genocide long before the throne of Satan arrived, but after its arrival, Stalin set up the Eastern Bloc made up of countries the Soviets had supposedly liberated in their push to defeat Hitler. For the next several decades, as we entered the Cold War era, the Soviet Union exported communism around the world. In 1958, the Soviets returned the Pergamon altar to communist-controlled East Germany. With the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the altar of Satan sits in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin. The altar of Zeus, or the throne of Satan as John called it, has no inherent power. In the book of Revelation, it outwardly symbolized what was taking place in the spiritual realm. And I suspect the location of this satanic seat of authority has moved over the years. And though many try to laugh off Marx's satanic illusions as the words of a poet, there are indications Marx was taking it much more seriously. Thanks again for joining me on this podcast, and we'll catch you again.
Thanks again for joining us on our podcast. Please check out our website at opentheword.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to receive notifications of future broadcasts. As well, please take a moment to provide a rating and even a review. Thanks again for listening.